All right, this video is going to be a review of our class discussion on James Madison's Federalist 51. This is the other Federalist paper that Madison writes that you're responsible to know in the first unit, along with Federalist 10. So first things first, this obviously is a Federalist paper, so it's arguing that there are good things about the Constitution. It's trying to convince people that the Constitution is good and that it should be approved by the states when they vote. So again, first things first, the upper left-hand corner, you see a quote. This quote is one of the more famous quotes from any of the individual Federalist papers. So there's a really good chance you may see this quote again. So Madison writes in Federalist 51, "If men were angels, no government would be necessary." So what does that mean? It means that if people were perfect, you wouldn't need a government to control them because they would just, treat each other with respect and follow, just treat each other normally. But because men are not angels, there needs to be a government to control them. The second part is, if angels were to govern men, neither external nor internal controls on government would be necessary. So the second part of this is, if the politicians were perfect, right, we wouldn't need any rules and regulations that govern their conduct either. So those two things sort of summarizes, in Madison's eyes, one of the characteristics of a good government. So in framing a government, which is to be administered by men over men, imperfect people looking over imperfect people, the great difficulty lies in this. You must first enable the government to control the governed, and the next place oblige it to control itself. So that's the last little part, is the answer to the first two boxes here. A good government should be able to do two things. The first is, a good government should be able to control the citizens. And the second thing is, a good government should be able to control itself, right? Like, there needs to be rules and regulations on the rulers and government officials. So that's his definition of a good government: one that can control the citizens and one that ultimately can control itself. So what Federalist 51 is going to focus on, it's going to focus on four ways in which the Constitution has been designed to allow the government to control itself, like rules and regulations, features of the Constitution that will prevent the government from abusing power. And this is really written as a response to the anti-federalists that thought the Constitution would create a type of government in which people could abuse power. All right, so the quotes are more complicated than the concepts. So the first thing that Madison writes: contriving the interior structure of the government, as that its several constituent parts may, by their mutual relations, be the means of keeping each other in their proper places. So that's sort of the last little bit of that is the key part, keeping each other in their proper places. So what he's saying is that this new government has been designed to have checks and balances. Each branch has the ability to stop the other branch from abusing power. So if Congress passes a law that is unfair, unjust, or is an abuse of their power, the president can veto that law, or the Supreme Court can declare it unconstitutional. If the president abuses his power, Congress can impeach and remove the president. Each branch has the ability to stop the other from abusing power. So that's Madison's argument, is that one of the things that will allow the government to control itself is the existence of checks and balances. All right, second thing. It is evident that each department should have a will of its own, and consequently should be so constituted that the members of each should have as little agency as possible in the appointment of the members of the others. The first part, I think, is the most important part of this quote. It is evident that each department should have a will of its own. First quote deals with checks and balances. This focuses more on separation of powers. So in our system of government, we don't give all of the power to one person or one group. We give each branch a little bit of the power. The legislative branch makes the laws. The executive branch enforces the laws. The judicial branch settles disputes that might arise regarding the laws. We don't have one person or one group doing that. We've basically spread the power out, right? So checks and balances and separation of powers will help control the abuse of power, help put limits on the government. All right. So I listed it as 3, but it's almost like a 2.5 because it's definitely related to separation of powers, and even a little bit like checks and balances. All right, so the quote reads: "In a Republican government, the legislative authority necessarily predominates. The remedy for this inconveniency is to divide the legislature into different branches." So what Madison's saying here is he and other founding fathers recognized that they believed that of the three branches, Congress would be most dangerous. And there would be really two reasons why, of the three branches, they felt like Congress might be the most dangerous. The first is that Congress has the ability to declare war. And the second is that Congress is the one that basically raises taxes. So these were two things that they were concerned about: who would declare war and what would be going on with taxes. So they thought, of the three branches, they thought Congress would be the most dangerous. So the remedy for this dangerous branch is that you're going to divide this branch into two separate pieces. The first is the House of Reps, and the second is the Senate. So what Madison is saying is look, not only do we have checks and balances between the branches, like the executive branch could stop Congress and Congress can stop the executive branch. And not only do we have separation of powers between the branches, but the designers of the Constitution even figured out which one of the three branches would be most dangerous. And then they actually have checks and balances and separation of powers within that branch, right? So we divide power in the most dangerous branch between two separate groups, the House and the Senate, and they each sort of have the ability to check each other. So that's how much detail the founding fathers put into this, right? And then the last feature: in the compound Republic of America, the power is surrendered by the people. It is first divided between two distinct governments, and then the portion allotted to each subdivided again amongst distinct and separate departments. Hence, a double security arises to the rights of the people. All right, so the most important part of this is compound republic and double security, right? So what Madison is saying is that there are two distinct governments. That's what a compound republic is. Two distinct governments, and power is divided between them. So what he is talking about here is the third major concept, along with checks and balances and separation of powers, which is something called federalism. And federalism basically divides power between the national and then the various state governments. So what he's basically saying is federalism is the concept by which you take power and rulemaking, and you give some of that to the national government and you give it some to the state government. So for example, we have a national Congress that meets in DC, and we have a state Congress that meets out in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. The Harrisburg Congress legislature makes rules for Pennsylvania. Basically, the national legislature that meets in DC basically deals with federal laws. So again, you're basically taking power and you're dividing it between the two groups. So not only do you have checks and balances and separation of powers on the national level, but you also have some power being given to the state governments, and you have checks and balances and separation of powers on the state level. You have a state legislature, a governor, a state Supreme Court. On the national level, you have a national Congress, a president, and a national Supreme Court. And the idea is that you divide power between those two levels, and then amongst the three branches on each level, you're dividing power so many times, you're really reducing the likelihood that anybody is going to be able to abuse it for their own selfish reasons.